So, okay. Okay, let's start the panel, and then we'll have a conversation at the end. Okay, so thank you very much. My name is Marcelo Vieta, and I'll be chairing today's panel on conversions of small and medium-sized enterprises into cooperatives and social purpose enterprises. We have two presenters today. Carl Pitchford, who will be starting and talking about his research in Europe mostly, and Sean Goby, who has been leading the large initiative out of the University of Waterloo. Before that, I'd like to acknowledge the land. We'd like to acknowledge the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. While we meet here on a virtual platform, we should take a moment to recognize the importance of the land on which we are each located. We acknowledge the territory to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in building positive relationships between nations and in developing a deep understanding of Indigenous peoples and their cultures. From coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all Inuit, First Nations, and Métis people. I also like to ask for forgiveness for the noise in the background. I do have construction going on, so just a bit of a heads up, but you won't hear much of me until the end anyway. So, and without further ado, I'll pass it on to you, Carl, and you'll have about 20 minutes, and I'll let you know close to the 20 minutes, or if you can be done before, that'd be great too. But I'll let you know when your time is nearing. Thanks.
Okay, Marcelo. Okay, great. Thank you very much, and hello everybody. So as you can see here, my topic of research was about employee ownership as a solution to SME succession. Okay, and you can see there that I'm also really focusing on the furniture industry, and I'll explain a little bit more about that later. And I chose to look at 3 countries in particular. Okay, on the next slide, you can see a little bit of my profile. There's a nice photo of me, and you can see that I'm representing Estis International Management School, which is part of the Catholic University of Lille, which is located in the north of France. Probably I'm also a little bit of a strange person, because I'm an academic, but I'm also a practitioner, and I'm also part of an organization which is called Corporate Finance in Europe. Okay, you can see that my obviously my main focus is therefore going to be on the financial aspects and looking at variables of a conversion to employee ownership. And probably the third important thing that you also need to know is that I've worked extensively, and I'm still working extensively in the furniture industry with around about 20 years experience. And basically my research interests are around conversions to employee ownership. And we'll see a little bit later on that could be not only worker cooperatives, but also the different options that we have both in the UK, but also in the United States. Okay, I'm also heavily involved in different initiatives in Europe, because I'm based in Belgium, but working in France, but working in other countries as well. Initiatives to save SMEs in order to not only keep the legacy of those companies, but also it's all about, for me, maintaining jobs. And if that can lead to some form of democratic ownership, then of course I'm all in favor of that. So this particular topic associated 3 areas, as I just mentioned. So we're going to be looking at examples and case studies that I designed and developed based on SME furniture manufacturers, which are located in the UK and France, for obvious reasons, 2 countries very, very close to what I do. But also I found it interesting to make a comparison with the context of the United States. Okay, so we're looking at furniture manufacturers. We're looking in also at the succession issue from either founder owners or families. And the main objective is to look or to try and solve the issue of retirement. Okay, so in this particular paper, I'm not looking at other reasons for selling the company, which could be unfortunately ill health, but could also be for reasons of financial distress or lifestyle changes. You know, I've many different reasons for wanting to sell a business during my years of experience, and to propose basically conversion to employee ownership or an employee buyout or conversion to a cooperative or some other form as the solution for saving those companies, saving those jobs, and making sure that we keep local communities, regional communities alive. Okay, something which has become very, very important in Europe. So obviously that's going to affect the context of France. That did previously affect the context in my birth country of the UK, but since then the UK has actually left the European Union, so other issues to deal with around that. And of course, in the United States, where I believe that, you know, there's a lot of innovation has been done in terms of not only the whole aspect of employee ownership, but particularly in the funding of conversions, which is something which, again, is of particular interest to me. When I started to look at this, obviously I was picking up on some statistics about succession, legacy, baby boomer retirements. I think in various other presentations, these reasons were also mentioned. But we mustn't forget also the contribution of SMEs to local economy, to local communities. And I'm sure that's also an element that we're very much aware of as well in Canada. I also want you to realize that the furniture industry, both from a manufacturing perspective and a retail perspective, is really fragmented. In other words, there are only a handful of really large players, mainly located in the United States, part in Canada, and various other countries around the world, but it's made up mainly of a huge number of small and medium-sized enterprises. Okay, so that led me to look into all sorts of different options, including employee ownership, to see what had been done, what is going on, how is the landscape changing in all of these countries. And so based on from the literature review, I've just cut this short, and my paper is based around what I call a four-part methodology. I really contained interviews to a minimum, and the idea being was to pick up really fundamental basics, and I ended up interviewing about 18 to 20 different people in the three countries, and there was really 6 that really came to light in innovative forward thinking. And what I found afterwards is that the others were just basically, you know, a little bit of a repetition of what I was picking up. So I focused on 6 practitioners, 2 in the UK, 3 in the United States, and then 1 in France. Okay. That led me then to try and look at what was going on in the furniture industry, and to analyze and pick up on statistics. Part of my work is to carry out due diligence, both sell side and buy side, with a focus on the furniture industry. That's my speciality, of course. And so that from then on, I started to look at what had been going on. So I drew up some figures in the 3 countries on successful conversions, conversions that failed, and also tried to look at the number of SME manufacturers that had actually disappeared in the 3 countries because no conversion or acquisition solution had been found for those companies, unfortunately. And from there, I built 3 case studies, which I'm going to explain to you a little bit afterwards, which were based on real conversions to employee ownership. So you can see the period that I studied was the conversions that took place in 2013-14, okay? And I kept in contact with the real cases, but for the purposes of my research, everything has been anonymized. And then I went back 5 years afterwards. So you can see I've got sort of a 5-year period, 2013-18, 2014-19, to pick up on the financial data, to analyze the information and see how those conversions were working, you know, if any headway had been made, and to basically analyze the financial statements. So it was like a before and afterwards, and draw some conclusions based on, you know, 5 key financial variables. Okay, so that was the purpose of the case studies, which I've already also separated out into a different document. And on top of that, while I was drawing up my statistics, I also picked up with around about 30 companies. It was very difficult to find any more. So I either got some, I did find a few more, but it was difficult to get hold of financial information or to corroborate and get relevant documents to be able to analyze. So I focused on those that were willing and ready to provide me with the information. So on top of that, I carried out a separate financial analysis with different financial variables, okay, on 30 SME companies, manufacturers. So 15 of those that converted to employee ownership, and another 15 that were either acquired by a competitor, by the trade, a strategic buyer, or private equity. Okay, so I'm going to share that obviously with you in a couple of minutes. Here you've got a breakdown of the 3 case studies with a couple of photos, just so you can imagine. I know we're not all specialists in all types of industry, but in the US, I took a conversion to an ESOP, Employee Stock Ownership Plan. And it was a family-owned business that was mainly manufacturing what we call mid-market furniture. So the little photo there shows exactly what I'm talking about. Then for the UK, I took a conversion to what we call in the UK an EOT, an Employee Ownership Trust, which is a little bit like the ESOP, all right? And there I took a company that was manufacturing at the high end of the market, so more about, we're talking about one-off single pieces, luxury items, mainly working in what we call in the business the contract market. So providing furniture for stately homes, museums, high-end hotels, and sometimes niche boutiques, and that type of area. And then the last one was one in France, which converted to a worker cooperative, what they call a SCOP in French, so Société Coopérative et Participative. And that was a company, as you can see also in the little photo, that was making metal furniture, so mainly for outdoor use, as we could imagine, so garden furniture, but also furniture which could be used again in the contract markets, hotels, restaurants, cafes, bars, seaside resorts, things like that. So it gives you an idea of the type of industry that we're looking at. Okay. By the way, my focus was also to look purely on B2B. So none of the companies that I then based my case studies on were selling directly either online or through stores to the public. They were all selling to other retailers. And I made it very careful as well to make sure that all of those manufacturers were actually producing in the United States, in the UK and France. So the products were being made in the markets. They were not being outsourced, okay? So even if we have accessories coming, as we can imagine, from various other different countries, the product itself was made, controlled and packed in the US, in the UK and in France. Okay, so that's something as well for me, which was really important to underline as I was moving forward with my research. Okay, so basically in that two objectives, the first one was to base the case studies on real existing manufacturers that converted to employee ownership. And the second objective was to try and draw some conclusions that what I was actually looking at, yes, could be applied to the furniture industry. And you know that I'm very active in that industry, so I'm picking up with all the associations and the various bodies, but also that we could draw conclusions maybe about the global SME success in this issue, and that we could really push this in terms of advocacy for conversion in whatever option we could choose. And there are countries that opt obviously more for the worker cooperative, and there are other countries that opt more, for example, in the United States, very closely linked to employee savings and then pension funds, and also in the UK. But we mustn't forget that in the US, and in the UK, there's also the other alternative. So worker cooperatives also exist. Okay, so in the three countries, we've also got a similar model of a conversion to a worker cooperative. Okay, so it's only going to be sort of the actual accounting principles, the tax laws, and things like that that are going to differ. Okay, so I wanted not only obviously to focus on some non-financial variables, okay, things like job creation, retention, how long people stay in the cooperative after it was converted, but for me, being basically and working a lot on due diligence and in finance, and more particularly in social and responsible finance, I wanted to take some real variables which would allow us to measure the before and after. Okay, so what I did is I looked at the financial performance, and I took the 5 variables, ratios, basically you can see there: return on assets, return on equity, debt to equity, interest coverage, and then operating margin, which some professionals call a return on sales, okay, because it's basically a return.
Carl, 5 more minutes.
Why did I focus on those? As to get a broad spread between the assets in the business, the capital, the ability to pay back, and the ability to, let's say, for management to run the company and be competitive and respond to the competition. Okay, so findings on the following table there, you've got some little diagrams to show the 3 options that are open to us. And then basically what I've done here is I've summed up a little bit. So you've got case study 1, 2, and 3. We've got the ESOP in the first column, the EOT in the second, and the SCOP, as we can call it, in the third column. And because don't forget, we're working on the furniture industry, so I also compared it in 2018 when I went back to see how things were moving on. I compared it with the global furniture industry averages for the same year. Okay, and basically what you can see is that there has been obviously some improvements. Okay, so the ESOP and the EOT, as we can imagine, being run really as standard businesses. Okay, so you can see there, and that shows also the viability of employee ownership, as a real model. Some debt to equity also, being going a little bit down, interest cover. And when you look at the column for the industry average, okay, we can see quite clearly that the conversions, okay, the worker cooperative is just a little bit over that, all right? Again, here you can see return on equity, the capital. We're going to obviously have, these figures are going to be lower because there's not so much pressure on the worker cooperative to get a return from either the assets, so in other words, the machines, buildings, whatever, but also the capital which is in the business, because it's going to be ploughed back. It's going to be reinvested in the indivisible reserves. Debt levels obviously gone down, okay, in line again with international cooperative principles. Interest cover unfortunately has gone down, so a little bit lower on the payback being able to cover, but still, guys, above the industry average. And then the interesting one, which has got a lot to do with the industry, is about the operating margins, okay? And you can see that slightly lower on the worker cooperative, okay? All of them a little bit lower in regards to the industry average, but still quite respectable, okay? For the basic financial analysis, so I took the Altman Z-score, which is, in other words, to be able to calculate financial distress. And I took those formula, applied the weightings. Basically, what happened is that I found that 80% of conversions to employee ownership were in the safe zone, so had a score of above 3, 20% in the middle gray zone, and 0 in financial distress. When I took the 15 companies that were sold to the trade, competition, or private equity, I got different results. I got about 60, 20, 10, so 10 really in financial distress. Okay, so that showed me one particular thing, that the business model is viable. When I went a little bit further, I did some statistical analysis t-test, but unfortunately my sample was not big enough to be able to prove that, you know, SME furniture manufacturers that do convert to employee ownership survive longer than those that are sold to the trade or private equity. So obviously I realized that there were some limitations on that, but I wanted to limit myself to the furniture industry, B2B, only manufacturing in the country that I chose. And, you know, rather than come up with a whole band of solutions, we spoke a little bit about that in the topic, in the theme that was covered yesterday. I'm a firm believer in setting up a fund, a little bit like the evergreen cooperatives in the United States, which could actually purchase companies, whether that would be in furniture, manufacturing, or, you know, that could be by industry, that could be per country, per region, which would then gradually over time, being more patient and less extractive, convert to employee ownership. Okay, so that's basically what I picked up on, because I'm seeing a lot of companies, unfortunately, that are disappearing, not only in furniture, but in other manufacturing areas, particularly in Europe. And just to end, otherwise Marcelo's going to come back to me. We mustn't forget that, you know, it's one solution to save the company, but on a more social side for me, the employees are, you know, they represent the core value of a firm, and we talk about assets. So, you know, employees are part of that journey, and you know, what better solution for an SME owner to see that company continue and to see those jobs maintained, saved, and hopefully even extra jobs created. Thank you very much. There you are, Marcelo. Hope I've kept as much as I can to the timing.
Yeah, excellent. 20 mintes. Thanks a lot, Carl.
Okay, there you go.
Lots of notes to compare after.
Okay,
great stuff. Sean, I will pass the baton to you now.
Thank you, Marcelo. I'm just gonna start sharing my screen now. Let's get this started. Great. So what I'm going to present on today is part of the work of the Legacy Leadership Lab based at the University of Waterloo's Waterloo Institute for Social Innovation and Resilience, and funded by the Investment Readiness Program, part of the Canadian Social Finance Fund, which I'll touch back on at the end. Just to give you a bit of background, which of course is, I think, not going to be unfamiliar to folks who are on this in this room. The next 10 years, these are some numbers we put together. We estimate about 700,000 small businesses in Canada with employees are at risk at closure because they lack an adequate succession plan. A lot of impact on small and medium-sized enterprises from COVID-19. And just to put in some numbers at the end, which came from the Small Business Lobbying Group, Canadian Federation of Independent Business, their estimates from January were that 181,000 SMEs in Canada are at risk of permanent closure due to the impact of COVID-19, which they estimate could put almost 2.5 million jobs at risk. So the term we've been using in our work at Legacy Leadership Lab is social acquisitions. And that's where we're looking at a conventional enterprise that converts into some sort of cooperative, nonprofit, or social enterprise through a change in ownership. So a couple of examples, Arise Architects, which was a architecture firm based in Guelph, Ontario that converted into a worker co-op. Mount Adstock in Lamiant, Quebec, which is a ski mountain that moved over to a municipal ownership. And so the local city purchased it. The Fernwood Neighborhood Resource Group, which is a nonprofit that serves the Fernwood community in Victoria, British Columbia, in 2005 bought a local cafe, the Cornerstone Cafe, which incidentally, in the year I lived in Victoria, I used to work at regularly, so it's a nice little place. And has since actually acquired a couple of other small businesses and residential properties. And Beau's Brewery in Van Leek, Ontario, which is a family-owned brewery that converted to worker ownership through an ESOP, and actually at roughly the same time also received certified B Corp status. So there's a business model change as well as an ownership change at the same time. So the term social acquisitions we use because much of the work, obviously this is CASC, and a lot of the work is really about cooperative ownership. But the mandate we were working with under our funding from the Social Finance Fund was looking at social purpose organizations more broadly. So we really categorize social acquisitions into a few types. One is employee or community buyout, so transition to worker, consumer, multi-stakeholder co-op or ESOP. A municipal buyout or nonprofit takeover. So really, the ownership concept completely disappears or transfers here because we're looking at, say, a vital cultural or tourism service that then gets acquired by the local community or a nonprofit or community trust sort to keep an operation as a piece of critical infrastructure. The sale of a business to a new for-profit traditional ownership model, but with a social entrepreneurial business model embedded in it, or finally partial versions of each of these. So some part of the business or share of the business goes to a social acquisition, while the rest may remain in standard private hands, or possibly part of the business is separated and turned into a social acquisition while the rest remains a traditional for-profit enterprise. So the component that I wanted to present on today, which is I think one of the more interesting insights that we developed or we came upon, was actually trying to map out step by step what the process of a social acquisition looks like. And there's a lot of variation from this model, but we were trying to get a bit of a high level overview of what it looked like. Now, why were we looking at building a map? The Legacy Leadership Lab is a multi-stakeholder collaborative where we're bringing together academic researchers, private, public, nonprofit sector partners to explore the space of social acquisitions. And having a map of what that looked like really helped us do sense making, create some language, what has been termed a boundary object, that people from different sectors, from different industries could use to talk to each other and share their learnings. Because so much of the expertise is so domain or industry or sector specific that this helped them co-create language that could be used. And that simple communication tool is really what allows people to learn from each other across industries and across sectors. So in practice, we were using a lot of that to help orient the activities of the participants in our process, identify gaps, opportunities for new initiatives, and help people place themselves in what the entirety of a social acquisition enabling ecosystem could look like. Now, I've talked a little bit about our participation. Part of this is because the process we were using, the Legacy Leadership Lab, is something we term a social innovation lab. And this is a process that is intended to support multi-stakeholder groups addressing complex social problems. So in pre-COVID times, this actually meant bringing people together. So we had stakeholders from across Canada meet in Toronto in January of 2020, which was supposed to be the first of 5 in-person meetings over the course of the year, which, as you can expect, didn't actually happen. But we pulled people together, and our only in-person workshop was actually focused around developing this system map. So where did our input come from? In advance of the workshop, we had 20 interviews from diverse, 20 key stakeholder interviews, 2 workshops focused on process mapping, 1 virtual, 1 in person. And we had a number of different iterations that we built on this model through essentially about close to 40 different small group events. And in advance of this, we provided a bit of a scaffolding in developing our map, say that we were going to build around 3 legs: a seller's leg, a buyer's leg, and a sustaining the enterprise both financially and socially into the future. For our first in-person workshop in Toronto, we also had the pleasure of having 6 people who were part of enterprises or connecting to enterprises on any of those legs that could give us a real live case example of what that could look like to help us really go in depth. So here are our 3 legs: a selling, a buying, and sustaining version of the journey. And when we were doing our in-person, it kind of looked like this. We had these big sheets of paper. People would gather around in small groups and just put on where they thought the steps were in a stepwise fashion to really try and figure out what was needed from the human capital side, financial side, social impact side, or maybe some other pieces that we hadn't been considering. This is the first iteration of the system map that we had. That had bits that are linear in it, and you can also see pieces that are circular, where it was where we weren't exactly, we knew they all had to happen, but exactly in what order was a little unclear. Further iteration and analysis with our stakeholders and elsewhere, we developed this more kind of linear design for the journey. It's kind of our research team doing some analysis. And here are really the key steps that we had. On the selling side, becoming aware of the need for succession is in advance of anything involving actually doing the sale. Then we go to how to prepare the business to sell, selling it. And then this really interesting kind of pivot point here where sometimes the owner uses that opportunity to completely exit, but sometimes they actually remain either permanently or for some period of time to help with the transition. On the buying side, again, the identification of opportunities, preparing to buy, which can also include organizing who those social acquirers are going to be. The steps for fundraising and purchasing the business, transitioning to taking the lead in the governance and business management. And then finally, in the sustaining piece, reviewing, learning, adapting as the enterprise enters this new reality, achieving financial stability and growth, and then a plan for the future, which of course could also include other rounds of what we've gone through, spinning off parts of the enterprise, recruiting new people to be involved in the governance for example, in a co-op, worker members, consumer members, community members. And here is the, in a bit more detail, some of the specific steps that we see in each of those places. Now, we don't necessarily, this is part of the reason we were dealing with that kind of linear process, is that we are seeing on the lines, there were a number of steps that where there wasn't necessarily an order to them, but we knew that they all kind of had to occur around the same period of time. So in the preparing to sell, the determining the financial value of the enterprise, selecting a sales strategy, completing tax planning, assembling documentation, defining objectives, and identifying and approaching potential buyers, there's sort of a simultaneity in which all of those pieces have to occur in order to be able to move beyond to the actual sale of the business. So, reflections from this map. I'm happy to go back to it in Q&A if that comes up. We're seeing a number of gaps and this visualization really helped us identify them. Seeing a little awareness of succession issues overall, let alone even the social acquisition piece. So there's almost 2 steps of work that need to be done there. We're also seeing that on this kind of the buyer side, the acquiring side, the ecosystem for supporting startups, students, people in the midst of career changes, folks with capital available that they want to invest in their own enterprises. The ecosystem that supports that rarely introduces acquisition as an option or training to support those things. A lot of us working in the co-op space know that also co-ops are rarely introduced as an option either, and nonprofits and the like. So like this all kind of comes together, but it's interesting to see that even acquisition suffers from those same barriers because a lot of the skills required are still the same. Social acquisitions are still relatively rare in Canada. We're dealing with a small N. There is a huge need to develop thought leaders in different professional communities. There's not enough lawyers and accountants to actually, or wealth managers to actually do this at scale. There are very few initiatives directed at the selling journey. So the enterprise is looking to exit compared to possibly the acquisition piece. And in the transition, knowledge transfer between owners, the old and the new owners is critical. There's also a lack of services for sustaining the social purpose after social acquisition. A lot for supporting sustaining financial objectives and keeping the enterprise afloat, but not necessarily the social objectives. So some insights that aren't necessarily gaps, but we thought worth reflecting. There seemed to be a big appetite for enabling conversions. Common language was important, and we saw that as a very big contribution of our work. But also the interest in social acquisition extends beyond succession and COVID response. Once we had this work going, we had a lot of approaches from entrepreneurs in their 20s and 30s looking to be involved in social acquisition, looking to sell their companies in social acquisitions, not retirees and people with very viable models that have made it through COVID, just looking to move on to other things. We also saw that social acquisition, the ecosystem extends beyond the usual suspects in social enterprise and the social finance space, and that this could be a leverage tool, a tool for bringing social finance into the mainstream. A good social acquisition is something a bank would finance, not just something that a philanthropist would finance. We also saw that there's possibly a lot of lock-in where companies start up as for-profit enterprises by default, not because it was ever actually the right legal form for them. A worker ownership or consumer ownership might have in fact always been better, but the small business centers they worked with never suggested it, or the training they received in college or university. Community governance could be an effective alternative to corporate governance in some of those contexts. But of course, there's a challenge that community governance is often viewed as a cost over and above corporate governance. Like you kind of have to do both, not just a community governance or a corporate governance. And that there's real weaknesses in the valuation of social acquisitions. Investors look for different things than workers would, or customer owners would. And the valuation tools just really aren't there for non-investor ownership. All that said, one of the, I think, compelling leverage points here overall is that developing an ecosystem that can support social acquisitions probably supports social enterprise more broadly. So where we're looking at going in the future, more case study development, a lot of peer networks for rapid learning, because a lot of the teaching infrastructure for human resource development isn't really there yet. Organizing capacity for people looking to be social acquirers, trying to figure out a path to mainstream social finance through social acquisition, and support for better regulatory and enabling tax environments in Canada specifically. So acknowledgements. There were 3 other co-authors on this piece, Meg Ronson, Tara Campbell, and Lily Camacho, but the team who's worked as part of the Legacy Leadership Lab over the course of our 1.5-year work is a bit larger than that. And we're very grateful to the Government of Canada and the Investment Readiness Program for funding our work. So that is it from me. Back to Mark.
Thanks, Sean. That's great. It's also great to have seen your project develop, your collaborative massive convening project developed parallel to our project, Co-op Convert, where we were focusing primarily on co-ops, or only on co-ops. But it's been really great to see also the interest that exists in the sector, the business sector, the co-op sector, policymakers, but that it's the complexity, I guess, and it's all the different pieces that are needed for conversions that not everybody knows about. And so it makes it difficult to, well, this is what our projects, I think, collectively, and also yours, Carl, can bring to the table, articulating, as you said, Sean, a common language, which is very important, and mapping and articulating and showing. And so this is great. Anyway, I will open it up to discussion. I don't know if anybody in the room, it's not a big room, or we can continue the informal conversation that we were having before. Daryl has his hand up. Daryl, yes.
This is great. These are great cases. I just want to pick up a little bit, Sean, on what you were talking about towards the end and raise a larger, more uncomfortable question for us all. Is you're starting to put together a lot of pieces specifically around conversions, which is great. And we probably need to have a denser group working on that across different things. But the bigger question in terms of the social ecosystem around that is how we're capturing these people you were talking about earlier, because we don't have strong presence in universities around these things, especially in business schools. And we're not present where they are. We're not present in case competitions. We're not present in the innovation centers. There's, as you were saying before, there's no pitch competitions out there. So I guess the question about we as a sector, and maybe specifically the role of CASC on that educational side of things, is how we're building the base and the communication systems to find that base that you want to be involved in conversions, right? And I guess that's sort of an open strategic question for us as CASC. Do we need to reflect a little bit more on those side of the pieces as well? And obviously that means with CMC, with some of the co-op foundations, where is our co-op case study competition every year, things like. So that's just a question I wanted to throw out there.
Thanks, Daryl. I'm happy to take the first kind of crack at that. In part because one of the things that we've been building out over the course of the work of the Legacy Leadership Lab was we put together, and you can find this on our Legacy Leadership Lab website, which I will send a link to. But we actually have built out a a teaching case writing guide, and have started assembling a small number of cases, including increasingly ones that heavily, to crib is an understatement, steal from the work of Marcelo Vieira. So one of the cases I was just working on last week, the Moonbeam grocery store, was a co-op conversion that where Marcelo's team did a lot of work developing that into a very deep research case, and our team took it and said, all right, let's see if we can write a 2-page teaching case out of it. One of the gaps that I had seen before we started the Legacy Leadership Lab was that you are absolutely right, there's not a lot of teaching cases out there, which makes it very hard to embed these other alternative forms into business schools in particular, but college and university, and even high school teaching more generally. One of the insights that we came to with doing kind of our convening processes is that kind of teaching case format could potentially be really useful in also educating current professionals. So we have investors, we have lawyers and accountants and wealth managers who, because they've never seen any social acquisitions, that's it. Because they've never seen any social acquisitions and aren't likely to be going back to university or college anytime soon, aren't going to be encountering them if we don't actually prepare a format that's going to make it easy for them to access that. So informally, one of the groups that came out of L3 was a group looking at non-debt and non-equity related financing tools for social purpose organizations. And it's a group of about a dozen people, including, you mentioned CMC, including some folks from CMC and co-op associations and some non-co-op related folks. And ultimately what that group's turned into is basically every month someone is presenting a case of a interesting way of financing an enterprise that they engaged in, that everyone learns from, then bats around like, how can they do it differently? What other contexts could we use this in? And so I'm hoping that the next iteration of our work at L3, a lot of it will be focused on developing cases and also trying them out in kind of both academic but also professional environments, because I think that's an interesting pathway to hopefully embed some of that training material. That said, it's still kind of a drop in the bucket of the changes we need in that ecosystem, because that ecosystem is gigantic.
Yeah, if I may, what I was really impressed with L3, with your project, I mean, there's lots of things, but the convening power that you had, I don't know how you did it, but they brought together, Daryl, and this is something that, I mean, I couldn't do on my own. I know you had a lot of great talent on your team, great conveners, but they brought together multiple stakeholders from multiple sectors, multiple across the country in the same space, in different formats. Really impressive. That's a big learning lesson learned from your project too. And it's something that, I mean, CASC, we have limited time. We're all volunteering. But we've been trying to we've been trying to promote the co-op teaching and co-op learning in universities and high schools and that. But that's something that we could maybe have brainstorm around. Like, how can we convene? How can we learn from what you did, Sean, and your group did, to replicate it and scale it up across or continue it, sustain it?
I'll try and add one insight on that I think is a pretty generalizable one, which is that it was easier to convene people around a problem than a solution. It's very in the co-op space to say,
right,
answer to your problems, and then forget to actually pitch why the problem matters or what the problems even are.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
One of the things that I think was really interesting about doing this convening around the problem, and the original problem was business succession.
Mm-hmm.
Business succession through the lens of also finding investable social finance opportunities, because that was what our funder was looking for. was that when you present it in that way and you have a suite of available options to look at, it turns out that the co-op model is often a really robust one. And so presenting the problem brings people to the table, and then it is one of a set of solutions, but it just happens to be a really good one, and people learn about it that way instead of maybe continually hammering on the co-op.
That's a great point. I want to pass it on to, or I want to ask a quick question to Carl, related. What type of networks would you say exist, enabling environments, ecosystems exist in the European countries that you looked at, or the 3 countries, but in particular, I mean, this is just a personal interest, selfish question, as in particular UK and France, which I mean, for me, France is a best practice region, where the C.G. Scott model and the co-op sector and social and solidarity economy legislation, and that it's just a confluence of different aspects that facilitate conversion. So can you speak to the ecosystems in the 3 countries that you looked at?
Yeah, well, if we take France, you've got the SCOP network, which which is very well known and widespread throughout France. Together with that, you've got a number of funding initiatives which are very closely linked to the SCOP network. One of the things that I picked up on is that there are a lot of initiatives for people who would like to start a cooperative, but not that so much for when you want to actually convert. Okay, so we always hit the same thing. Oh no, Carl, yeah, no, we don't do that. We're looking for startups. We're looking, and I can see you smiling, so I can see that we share the same things. But on the other hand, there's been a huge growth over the last 5 to 6 years. There are, I work with chartered accountants specialized only in cooperatives and social businesses. So it's starting to come, but it's starting to come with the younger generations. Okay, the other people are not interested in that. So we've got this network support, loads of initiatives, crowdfunding initiatives for cooperatives, start your COP and name your COP and all that sort of thing. I'm not so sure how effective they are, because if everybody's contributing 20 euros and I've got a conversion on the table of 5 million, then I'm not going to hit those targets. Okay. It's in French law, you know, that from 2014, there is La Loi Hamon, which says that if somebody wants to sell a business, then they should propose it, first of all, to the employees. The employees should be known, workers' council. So all of that is in place, but we always come up against the same thing, and that's what I'm fighting against: politicians and banks. Take those 2 out of the equation, and we could do a lot of good stuff.
Yes, and also, what is the, so many of us want to understand what an employee ownership trust is. I know this has been a model that's been deployed in the UK for the past almost decade. How is that different from an ESOP, from a worker co-op? Can you maybe?
Well, I think it comes down again to the 100% ownership and the partial ownership, first of all, okay? Because with ESOPs, you know what the system is. EOT, it's basically the same. I'm not aware of 100% EOTs, okay? Either the owners are still there, or they've got, 10% and have got 90 amongst the employees, which is still a good thing. It's a start, okay? But a co-op, whether I'm in the UK or whether I'm in France, as soon as I convert, we're on 100%.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And
in the UK, the movement is big. There are a lot of initiatives. I was on the board previously of Cooperative and Community Finance, where we looked at a lot more risk areas and a lot more things. But again, it's always the notion of return. You've got an organization which is called Capital for Colleagues, which is listed on one of the smaller markets in the UK, where they pretend, where you can, where they get funders, they get investors, to actually buy and help employees purchase their business. But they're working on the same return as private equity. So how do you call that social? Sorry. And then we at Cooperative and Community Finance, we're even though we're considered as what we would call a friendly lender, we were still working on 6 and 7%. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to cover the costs. And that's why I'm pushing always for what I call patient capital. There needs more patient capital initiatives, more non-extractive. The money is there, but the people don't know about the initiatives, or they think there's too much risk. So we've got a lot of work to do still on the risk analysis. And you know, in the US, I think you probably know them just as much as me. I'm speaking to people like Cutting Edge Capital, but also Permanent Equity. You know, all of those organizations that are moving forward slowly but surely. But again, you know, it's a question of time. And as you've mentioned, and Sean said as well, people don't know these things exist. They don't know, and then it's, oh yeah, all of a sudden, shit, yeah, that company disappeared. Why didn't they take it over? Why didn't? And every week I've got a case in France like that. Oh yeah, but that's going to be difficult because, you know, there's a lot of assets and too much funding and all that. But when you calculate unemployment benefit, loss of taxes, and I'm sorry to go over those things, but the bill comes to the same.
Yes.
So if I use a bit of public money, if I could lose some of that money which is wasting on accounts, and if I could get rid of zombie companies that suck up money because of COVID that don't actually exist, and I could put it to good use and protect some of those communities. But that's just my little political
yes.
On there.
Yes.
Sorry about that. Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. It's something that that I've been harping on for a long time, and not many people listen to this in Canada. Is the Italian model, which I've done work on.
So on.
So the Marcora law. Different types of financing, including the use of employment insurance or unemployment insurance. Or in Canada, it's called employment insurance. And in Canada, we have a precedent for it. You know, like, so in the fisheries sector, this is exactly how they bridge people's incomes, because it's a seasonal job, right? So it saved the Maritimes basically, so basically they use EI to bridge the time when fishers aren't working. So it's in Italy, they use EI. You can claim future EI for buying out your business if your employer is wanting to sell. And I was talking to a Canadian cooperative developer, and he basically said that it was in the books in the 90s, and that it was, I don't know if it had been used or what, but anyway, so things like that we can learn from places like France and other places that, but somehow we come up, and Sean, you probably came up with the same thing. We come up with the same kind of response that you just did. Well, you know, it's not possible. It's too big. It's but then you have an industrialized country like Italy or France with complex, value chains and production processes, and they're doing it. Right. So
and it works. And it works.
Yeah.
And if I could just, before we go on, Sean, you want to say something? Go on.
I was going to say, I mean, and even if within Canada, I mean, like we do more of this in Quebec than we do outside of Quebec.
Correct.
I noticed that as well.
I put a name in the chat box. Carl, who I thought you might want to connect with, John Shell at Social Capital Partners, which is based in Toronto. But Social Capital Partners has helped do an ESOP buyout of a guitar manufacturer in the States, but has also lobbied heavily and got included in the last federal budget in Canada, at least trying to get an employee ownership trust model or something like it into Canadian law.
Yeah.
And I thought would be an interesting person for you to connect to as we were talking about.
Yes, it actually made it into it's a sentence in the budget, in the current budget.
Which is a big win on a policy application.
Employee ownership trusts are mentioned, and employee ownership.
Okay.
That said, I know John is has made the connections, has opened other models, and I think Co-ops and Mutuals Canada and others are going to try and take that opening to try and broaden what that could look like.
Yeah, I was involved with Russ Christensen, CWCF and CMC, and the Co-op Convert, CMC and CWCF put together a proposal for the feds as well, for the federal government. I like to think that for this budget round, Sean Fraser, who's an MP from Nova Scotia, and he is parliamentary secretary to our finance minister, is really interested in co-ops and conversions. So he read our proposal. I like to think that our research had something to do with this language as well, but I know that social capital partners really were lobbying hard. So anyway, I mean, there's a group of us.
We've got to carry on. If we've just got a couple of minutes, I'd like to come back with what Daryl said earlier.
About
education.
Probably 2 more minutes.
Yeah, I'm also involved in that, and I set up already 2 years ago a course called Entrepreneurship Through Acquisition. So we're already looking at, it's obviously located in the region around Lille, which is in the north of France, which has been pretty hard hit by loss of coal mines, steel industry, all those heavy industries, as you can imagine. And so we're getting a lot of interest where I'm pushing students not to take internships in large corporates, but to go and work an SME, get a foot in the door, use it as a platform, take it over, and then do whatever you want with it. Okay, I'm still hitting against funding, but I'm getting there in the end, and the aim is to open that up. I'm also including in there a little bit what Sean mentioned. So social entrepreneurship through acquisition. How can I take an existing company? We're a school which is based around values, a lot of values about protection of the environment, social and solidarity economy. And we're doing a lot on that. And we also send our students all around the world. COVID put stop to that. And what we did this year is we did an enormous international hackathon. So we took 40 French small, medium-sized companies, and we got students to work on it from Chicago, Cook University, Argentina, and obviously our school as part of the Catholic University. And the hope is that I'm looking to get something together for 2022, because you need time to organize these things on like a social hackathon where we work on global social issues, and acquisition for me is part of that, where we can, maybe do some lobbying, bring students together. And, if some of you guys want to get involved in that, then I'm, open to, whatever we can do.
Carl, this is really interesting. I just moved to a business school myself this past year, which is a strange place for me to be. But I taught business students, and I taught a course on, it was officially on nonprofits and public sector, but I sort of injected a lot of co-op things. Yeah. I had them all do a business plan, and out of 120 students, 90 did plans on cooperatives. But what do they do now? I mean, they never would have heard of cooperatives if I hadn't had that course. And so that's what these things, I guess, and this is one of the unexpected benefits of COVID, is that we all now have much better media skills, especially on Zoom. Yeah. And doing these things on Zoom can really cut down on the costs and make doing these things internationally even, right? Yes. These types of competitions.
Sharing best practices.
And so we need our co-op den competition, that co-op pitch competition perhaps, and things. And how can we start thinking about these things, and also hackathons, which are huge things as well, right? So
yeah, Carl, we've been on the board of CASC. We've been and led by Daryl. We've been really thinking about this, how to motivate, how to cases and teaching moments. So we'd be happy to talk to you about your hackathon moving forward, and certainly you would have a venue into Canada perhaps through CASC. Yeah, both Daryl and I sit on the board. So let's continue the conversation.
Now we know, and I really appreciate this, because I don't think there are many outside Canadians having presented. I think there was another Marcelo. I think yesterday he was based in Italy, right? So
he's working with us as well.
It's all good, because I would never have been able to make it, physically. That would be obviously, it's always great to meet people face to face. That's what keeps us going. But as Daryl says, the technology has brought everything, and enables me to do a full day work and still follow you with you guys until late evening. So
yes, it's pretty late for you actually.
It's 10 past 8 in the evening.
Yeah. Okay, it's not that bad. And Europeans go to, they eat later, they go to bed later anyway. Okay.
Yeah. And over here, we've got 48 hours in a day, so it doesn't matter. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, unfortunately, we do have to wrap it up. We're going to be,
Yeah.
there's a hard cutoff at 12:10. So